How one family secretly controls Italy's economy. On a rainy Monday in 1992, the lights stayed on in Turin, even as the rest of Italy held its breath. People thought the country's fate lived inside Parliament, inside speeches, inside flags. But the truth was colder and simpler. Italy didn't fear a coup that week. It feared a bad quarter on a balance sheet. Because history doesn't collapse from bullets first. It collapses from bankruptcy, from insolvency, from the silent moment when the ledger stops believing in you. In boardrooms, not battlefields, the nation's pulse is counted in cash. And in Italy, one family learned to hold that pulse like a thumb on a vein. You've heard the myth of modern Italy, that it's a democracy of loud debates and shifting coalitions, a land of art, football, and chaos, that no one really runs it, that power is too fragmented to be owned, that the system is too messy to control. But behind the noise sits a quieter machine, a network of ownership stakes, voting rights, bank relationships, and industrial leverage. A machine built to survive kings, dictators, and elections. A machine that moves like smoke and leaves fingerprints on everything. This story isn't about a family name you see in neon. It's about a family name you don't say out loud. The kind of name that doesn't need posters. The kind of name that doesn't need office. Because it already has the keys. Imagine a country where the largest employers are not just companies. They are pressure valves. They are political weapons. They are the difference between a prime minister surviving the winter or being buried before spring. Now imagine the same group also shaping what people read, what they cheer, and what investors trust. That's the shape of the control we're talking about. Not a throne, a portfolio, not a crown, a ledger. And the family at the center didn't win by being the richest. They won by becoming unavoidable. In the streets of Milan, wealth looks like marble and tailored suits. In the countryside, it looks like factories that never close. In Rome, it looks like favors exchanged at midnight. The illusion is that Italy's power is cultural, emotional, historic. But beneath the surface, the foundation was rotting. Because the real ruler isn't romance, it's liquidity. A nation can have poetry and still starve. A government can have flags and still default. And the family understood this early, when Italy was still a young country pretending it was old. At its peak, the Italian dream was loud, parades of workers, new highways cutting through farmland like fresh scars. Steel, engines, and smoke rising into the sky like proof of destiny. The newspapers called it progress. The people called it pride. The politicians called it their achievement. But prosperity is always a costume. Underneath you find the body. Underneath you find the debt. Underneath you find the contracts and the payments due. And that's where the family lived. Not on balconies, but in the back rooms where the numbers decide who breathes. They didn't build an empire by conquering land. They built it by owning the pipes that fed Italy's bloodstream. Cars, credit, shipping, insurance, media, football, each one a different artery, each one a different hostage. And like any hostage situation, the power isn't in the gun, it's in the dependence. The addiction. Italy's addiction wasn't drugs or alcohol. It was jobs, it was payroll. It was the promise that the factory gate would open every morning. Debt is a living thing when millions rely on it. It grows teeth, it grows claws. It whispers to politicians at 2 a.m. It hovers over families at dinner. It makes a nation negotiate with itself, and the family learned to become the dealer. Think about the scale of that. If you control the companies that employ entire towns, you don't need to run for office. You just need to decide when to expand, when to freeze hiring, when to restructure. Those are not business choices in Italy. Those are political earthquakes. So Italy became trapped, not by ideology, but by the payroll ledger. Every time the state wanted to punish the family's companies, it faced the same nightmare: unemployment, protests, a collapse in tax revenue, a chain reaction of bankrupt suppliers. The trap was elegant. The family didn't threaten the state. The state threatened itself. Every crackdown became self-harm. Every policy became a hostage note written in Italian bureaucracy. And the family simply waited, calm as accountants. But every addiction needs an antagonist, not a general, not an assassin, something colder, a creditor, a market force, a banker with a pen that can erase decades. In Italy's case, the antagonist was often the bond market, because Italy is not a nation with unlimited cash. It is a nation that borrows. It sells promises to survive. It lives on rolling debt like a gambler living on tomorrow's winnings. And when borrowing becomes oxygen, the bondholders become gods. When interest rates rise, governments sweat. When credit ratings fall, budgets bleed. When investors lose faith, sovereignty becomes theater. And the family knew exactly where to stand when the tide of money moved. They stood where the state would look for help. Now let's pull back. Let's walk through the spiral, step by step, not as a clean timeline in a textbook, as a slow drowning, because collapses rarely happen in one day. They happen in a series of small humiliations. It starts with expansion. Always. A factory grows, then another. A brand is acquired. A rival is absorbed. The family doesn't just make products. It becomes infrastructure. Suppliers build their lives around it. Banks write loans around it. Politicians build campaigns around it. Then the first warning signs arrive. A recession, a global shock, a currency crisis. Suddenly sales fall and the company's balance sheet tightens like a noose. The family doesn't panic. It negotiates. It calls the banks. It calls the government. It calls the unions. And in those calls you see the real power map. Because the question isn't, should the company be saved? The question becomes, can Italy survive if it isn't? That's not capitalism. That's dependency as governance. In the early 1990s, Italy's financial world shook hard. The lira trembled. Government debt swelled. Investors watched like sharks. And while the public argued about corruption and politicians, the family's world was focused on a more brutal metric: cash flow. Refinancing, survival. In a crisis, ideals are luxuries. The only religion is solvency. And the family played the crisis like a piano, pressing keys that made the state dance. One move would be to warn about layoffs. Another would be to promise investment if policy went their way. Another would be to quietly shift operations abroad, making the threat real. It's not a conspiracy when it's written in contracts. It's just leverage. The rule of three always arrives in a collapse. First, the gold is gone. Second, the credit is frozen. Third, the allies turn away. In Italy's case, substitute gold with confidence. Substitute allies with investors. Substitute credit with the banking system. Confidence vanished in waves, banks tightened, governments stumbled, and the family positioned itself as a stabilizer, the responsible actor, the one that could keep engines running, the one that could keep exports alive, the one that could keep Italy from looking like a failed ledger. But here's the noir part. The control wasn't just in factories, it was in perception. And perception is money. If people believe in you, capital flows. If they doubt you, capital runs. The family understood that controlling narrative meant controlling credit. So they reached into newspapers, magazines, broadcasting, the cultural bloodstream, not to entertain, to frame, to normalize, to decide which scandals mattered and which disappeared into fog, to decide which politician was serious and which was dangerous. A country is easier to manage when you manage its story. That's not propaganda with banners. That's editorial choices, headlines, timing, silence. The most powerful sentence in politics is sometimes the one never printed. And then there's football. People think sports is distraction. That's naive. Football is loyalty training. It's a weekly ritual of identity. It's a way to create emotional debt that no bank can measure. When you own what people love, you don't need to own them. In Italy, a club isn't just a club. It's a flag. It's an inheritance. It's a family tradition. When millions wear your colors, they forgive your sins. They see your wealth as their victory. They defend you like kin. So the family anchored itself in both ends of the Italian soul. Work and worship, payroll and passion. The factory paycheck on Friday, the stadium roar on Sunday. That is not business diversification. That is social architecture. Now every thriller needs the smoking gun moment, not a dramatic shootout, a meeting, a document, a signature. The moment the fate is sealed with ink. For this family, the smoking gun is never one paper. It's a pattern of papers, a holding structure, voting shares, special control rights, deals that look boring until you realize what they do. Because control is often legal, not loud. It hides in corporate charters the way a knife hides in a coat. You can own less than half of something and still control it if the rules are built that way. You can hold the votes without holding the majority. You can steer an empire with a small stake if the governance is designed like a trapdoor. So in quiet rooms, the family built the equivalent of a financial fortress. Layers of companies holding shares in other companies. Boards populated by loyalists, agreements signed decades earlier that still function like chains. It's not romance. It's engineering, and when the state tries to push back, it faces a legal maze, a corporate labyrinth. Every move is slowed by paperwork. Every fight becomes a technical argument. Meanwhile, the economy needs jobs tomorrow morning, not after a court decision in 5 years. That's the foreclosure feeling. The family doesn't need to seize the state. The state sells pieces of itself to survive, and the family is always there with the cash. Each crisis becomes a liquidation sale. Each bailout becomes another key handed over. Imagine the dialogue in those meetings, stripped of politeness. It sounds like this. If you want stability, you protect our interests. If you want investment, you give us flexibility. If you want peace, you absorb the cost. No shouting. Just terms. Now we approach the climax, the default moment. Not necessarily a formal default on paper, but the moment the money runs out emotionally. The moment the public realizes it is not in control, the moment sovereignty becomes a word people say to feel better. Because sovereignty is solvency. If you can't pay, you can't choose. If you can't borrow, you can't govern. If markets decide your interest rate, markets decide your future. A flag doesn't lower the yield on bonds. Cash does. Picture a winter where families fear heating bills, where food prices feel heavier, where young people flee to other countries for work, where the government announces reforms that sound like amputations. That's what it feels like when the ledger turns against you, and in that cold air the family remains warm, not because they are immune to crisis, but because crisis is where leverage grows. When everything is stable, influence is subtle. When everything is breaking, influence becomes explicit. A nation in distress sells its pride cheap. It sells assets. It sells policy. It sells exemptions and incentives. The family can buy not just companies, but outcomes. They can negotiate regulations. They can secure protections. They can shape the recovery. Now let's talk about aftermath, because every economic sin leaves scars. When a country builds itself around a few pillars, those pillars shape generations. Entire regions become dependent. Education follows industry. Identity follows employers. And breaking free becomes painful. It can take decades for a nation to unwind that kind of entanglement. Even if the family's influence fades in one sector, it appears in another. The empire doesn't die. It changes clothes. It becomes global. It shifts headquarters. It follows capital like a shadow, and the people, they inherit the consequences. A labor market designed around one giant. A political culture trained to negotiate with corporate power. A media ecosystem shaped by ownership. Even the way Italians argue about national interest becomes distorted, because national interest starts to mean don't anger the people who sign the paychecks. It starts to mean keep the flagship brands safe. It starts to mean avoid the kind of chaos that scares foreign investors. Slowly the country learns to behave like a company, and companies don't have citizens. They have stakeholders. That's the real horror. When the state adopts corporate logic, people become numbers, costs, risks, efficiencies. That's when democracy becomes a quarterly report. The final check, the symbolic repayment, is never one payment made in a single year. It's a generational tax. It's the young paying for the old deals. It's the middle class paying for stability. It's the country paying in lost growth, lost births, lost hope. Even when the macro numbers improve, the psychological debt remains. Italians learn to distrust politicians because politicians look temporary, but corporate dynasties look permanent. Governments come and go. Boards remain. Families remain. So what's the lesson here? It's not evil family controls everything, like a cartoon. The lesson is more unsettling. Systems create leverage. Dependency creates rulers. And when a nation ties its survival to a few balance sheets, those balance sheets become political documents. This is the dark economic truth. History is not decided by speeches. It is decided by accounting, by resources, by credit, by who can endure a bad year without begging. The ledger writes the ending long before the public hears the plot. So the next time you watch Italy's elections like a sport, ask yourself a harder question. Who still gets paid no matter who wins? Who controls the payroll? Who controls the debt? Who controls the story people believe? Because the real crown is invisible. It's a signature on a contract. It's a voting right buried in legal code. It's a bank call returned instantly. It's a line item in a budget that can't be cut. It's power without a spotlight. And if you want more stories like this, where the glamour is stripped away and the ledger is exposed, subscribe to the channel. Stay ahead of the people still watching the parade. Because the parade is never the point. The point is the balance sheet. The point is the cash. The point is who survives when the money stops.